Alright, so for the weekend, I got there really early on Friday and waited in line, was one of the first people in there. About an hour before we were allowed in, they kind of shuffled everybody into this arcade where they had a ton of free arcade games, and that was a lot of fun, even over the course of the 3 days. I went in about 3 or 4 times to the arcade and just played some games, Area 51, Time Crisis 2 and 3, and they had Afterburner, they had a bunch of free games, and it was a great example of how cheap and fun this whole weekend was. I mean, it was surprisingly cheap to get a 3-day pass and like free parking, and it was all about just sort of having fun and meeting tons of people. I saw some great cosplays. One of the highlights was someone was dressed as sort of the classic early to mid '90s Tomb Raider, like the old like Lara Croft, Tomb Raider 1 and 2 style with the two pistols and sort of the blue tank top, and someone dressed as the new Tomb Raider from the sort of reboot they just did, and they sort of crossed paths and stared at each other and did sort of a mock like battle for a couple of seconds, and it was the little things like that, and just meeting new people, and just there was definitely a sense of everyone seemed very open and comfortable and enjoying the idea that they were surrounded by people who were similar to them, in that even if they liked entirely different things, someone who's a hardcore NES collector versus someone who's a Genesis collector or like a Dreamcast collector or whatever, it was still appreciating the idea that you may not like the exact same thing, but you're of the like mind in a different area, and everyone just having fun and just meeting the people, I think, was the highlight, whether they're YouTube stars or just any random person you run into. That to me was probably the most fun, just meeting people and talking about games, and rather than just having talking to a camera like right now and getting some replies from people and having like little talks over short like Twitter messages or something, and all that's really fun, but nothing beats actually looking at a person eye to eye, shaking their hand, and really just having a chance to talk to them personally in that manner. You can't beat that. And for me, that was sort of the best part, and meeting people like Johnny, Alpha Mega Sin, everybody. It was a lot of fun. Got to do a couple panels, and I was really, really happy that I got to meet Ian Ferguson, who many of you might not know from Pat the NES Punk's videos. If you watch the Unnecessary podcast, you'd know who he is, but otherwise, you might not. He was someone else who I've always kind of really liked listening to him, even more so than Pat on the Unnecessary podcast, simply because I feel like I have more in common with him, and we're both big Namco fans, and he's just someone who I feel like I could actually have a conversation with, rather than just like, oh, I'd really like to meet you, I'd like to talk to you. And he was a really nice guy, very, very approachable, so it was fun to meet him, and I went to their panel, him with Pat, and that was a great panel. Went to a couple others. The highlight of the panels was definitely the last one I went to. They sort of combined the Alpha Mega Sin panel with the Game Chasers panel, and everyone else, like Johnny was there lined up, guys from GameSack, like everybody was there for that panel. It was a big panel, and it was so much fun. And till the end, where there was a bit of a flip out, but that I'm not sure I'll get into, maybe another video, depending if they release any footage of that, the Game Chasers, but that's a story for another time. That was a really fun panel, lots of people taking their shirts off and drawing dicks on the table, and it was just sort of a no-holds-barred, just kind of fun, raucous time. It was definitely just sort of this, more about just having raunchy fun and being able to, in the middle of that, interject serious talk about gaming topics. And that was, I think, the part that was the most fun about that entire panel, was that it wasn't just a very dry talking about serious gaming topics, and it wasn't just crazy, out-of-control fun with no context. It was just the perfect mix, and the ability of people like that to have a really good time and still be very thoughtful and creative in what they're actually going to talk about with you at the same time. It's not just one or the other, they can do both, and I think that's what makes those type of people, those personalities, enjoyable to watch on YouTube. And there are a couple other things going on throughout the whole convention that I got little glimpses of, didn't get to see all of. There was a cosplay contest, saw a little bit of. There were some really cool DJs that had some actually really interesting music going on in the arcades, with a lot of videos to their music, little music videos going on behind them on the big screen. There were clips of anime that were really set up really nicely. Everything was very professional. A lot of the booths were great. I had fun just walking around for hours, just looking at things with no intention of buying, because I'm not going to go in there and drop like $2,000 over the weekend, but it was something where it was a lot of fun just to actually be able to physically look and hold things that normally you don't see a lot of, especially like around where I live. It's more of maybe you see them on eBay or something, but actually be able to physically look at things and touch them and talk to vendors and talk to other people that are looking in the same areas that you're looking at. Again, just meeting people and being able to explore and see really cool, interesting things. I did pick up a few games though, especially I kind of waited till Sunday where a lot of the deals were going on, but earlier in the week I did have one purchase thanks to Johnny Millennium and his videos and his recommendation of the Tengai Makio series, the Far East of Eden, Tengai Makio 4, The Apocalypse on the Sega Saturn. Definitely, I played the first couple minutes of it and watched the intro. It's only been like a few days, but just kind of get a taste for it. But again, thank you, Johnny, for this recommendation. I'm really, really excited to start playing this. This series is great. I'm having a lot of fun sort of exploring it and getting into it. Absolutely, I'm excited. This is probably my second favorite purchase of the weekend. I also picked up some Saturn games. The Wanchai Connection, which is an FMV murder mystery. This was a launch title for the Saturn in Japan, and you play as a Hong Kong detective in the Wanchai district, exploring what starts off as a murder mystery. Air's Adventure, which is a very early RPG for the Sega Saturn. And a visual novel by Elf, well, published by Elf. I don't think they developed it, but it looks like a lot of fun so far. I do like Elf as a company. It's one of those things where you kind of know what you're getting, I feel like, when you pick up something published by them, just because they have maybe not the same types of stories all the time, but a very similar feel. And the shining gem for me, personally, was Shining Force 3. This is part 1. A lot of people don't know that Shining Force 3 on the Saturn is actually 3 parts, and we just only got part 1 in North America, but this is the Japanese copy of Shining Force 3. And this is exciting for me because I've never played it, as someone who just picked up a Saturn a few months ago, and I'm finally getting into it. But Shining Force 1 and 2 are my second and third favorite games on the Genesis, right behind Phantasy Star 4. So Shining Force 3 is really looking good so far. I'm very excited to play this. I love tactical RPGs. That was the biggest pickup for me. I also got one PC Engine game. I got Gulliver Boy, and Gulliver Boy was recommended to me by many different people because it seems to be not only a genuinely great RPG, but it's one of the top ones as far as pushing the system to its limits. It's one where if you really want to showcase to show what the PC Engine can actually do, especially with that Super CD ROM 2 attachment and like the card, or if you have a PC Engine Duo or R or whatever, this is a really great graphical showcase that also happens to be a fantastic game. So it's not just sort of something that's visually exciting, it's something that I'm actually really looking forward to playing. And all these games were in great condition and super cheap, and they all had like the maps that were included in with them, the manuals, and I was amazed at how cheap some of these were, especially Sunday getting the good deals. It was just another example of just how much fun it was to just go around and explore, and felt like you were in like practically like a Super Potato or like a Book Off in a way. Just with the number of imports that really around me, you don't see import games very often. Even at a lot of old retro stores, they might have a very small, limited selection. It's really hard to get your hands on physically touching and feeling and purchasing an import game. It happens to be more just sort of like eBay things for me. So going to a convention that was only about 2 hours away from me and seeing just endless tables of import games for systems that I really enjoy was fantastic. I mean, I could have picked up like 100 PC Engine games if I had the money to do so. It was so much fun, but even just being able to look at them was great. And I had two last pickups here. Hercules: The Legendary Journeys on the N64, which I did play many, many years ago, and yeah, it's horrible. I played it for about an hour last night, and it really just, my memories were correct. It is a terrible game, but being such a huge fan of the series, and seeing as this is the only console game released for Hercules, I had to get it. It is awful. I mean, it's as bad as Kevin Sorbo's Ego is Big. but still I had to get it as a fan of the series, not one that I was willing to pay complete in box prices for just because it's bad, but getting the loose cart was great for that. And picked up Perfect Dark for $4, which was really good. That's something like I'd expect to pay that much at like a yard sale maybe, but this was fantastic on that last day. $4. It's in, just a loose cart, but it's in perfect condition. Label's fine. There's not a single scratch on it. Great. Perfect Dark I remember playing back in the day, and it's one that we have the majority of the releases by Rare on the N64. It's my wife's favorite console and sort of one of her favorite companies ever, and for some reason we just never had this one, so Perfect Dark, great to add to our N64 collection. Got some great games, had a fun weekend, really loved going to the panels, really loved meeting lots of new people and just seeing different events. And there was so much that I had to work a little bit over the weekend, and there's no way you could see everything. Panels going on at the same time, and there's so much there. I can't wait to go back next year. It's going to be a lot of fun, and my wife's going to go with me next year, so I think next year is going to be even better. Try and go to all 3 days for the whole day if possible next time. And it was even more fun than I thought. Really enjoyed too many games. If you are anywhere near the Philadelphia area, check it out next year. Wait around till next June. And it's a great convention with a lot of stuff, and it's even bigger and better than I had personally expected.